I'm with Hal Davis. You're the Technical Director of CIBSE. Can you tell me what your role entails?
So as Technical Director, I lead on a lot of the work we do on guidance, on policy, responding to government consultations, and really anything to do with the technical information that we produce for our members and for the wider public.
You've just presented as part of a panel entitled Creating Infection Resilient Environments. Can you tell me what were the critical areas that review detailed or identified?
Right, so what we've learnt in the last 2 years is that a lot of infection can be transmitted through the air. In the early days of the pandemic, everybody thought it was all about surfaces and droplets and close contact, but there were a small group even then who said there's more to this, and so now we're all familiar with aerosol transmission. We had hands, face, space initially, and that became hands, face, space and fresh air, or hands, face, space, ventilate. And what we were saying this morning was just because all the restrictions have ended, it doesn't mean COVID's over, and it doesn't mean that the benefits of having good ventilation in buildings to reduce transmission of things other than COVID have gone away. There are other respiratory diseases, and when you stop and look at it, there's a lot of ill health from people becoming infected in a building space, and with better ventilation we could cut that down.
And this is more than sick building syndrome or anything like that, I understand. It's a
this is quite different to sick building syndrome. This is, are we getting enough outside air into a building so that we've got the 10 litres per second per person ventilation rate that we want in most buildings. So it's very much it's actually about making sure that the system works effectively. There will be some buildings that don't meet the standards and probably need some significant intervention. But the bigger issue is buildings that have been built to the regs. They're capable of delivering the ventilation rates we want, but they're just not very well managed. Systems may not be well maintained, they may not be operating effectively, so we've got ineffective ventilation rather than inadequate ventilation, if that distinction makes sense to you. So what we've learned over the last couple of years is that we could do a lot to improve the health and well-being in our buildings by just paying attention to the basics of good ventilation. On overheating, we've just got a new part to the building regs, which says that for new homes, developers need to think about overheating and do some basic tests to reduce the risk of overheating. So that's been taken care of. And there are some people who say, well, all this focus on airtight buildings to make them more energy efficient has come at the expense of ventilation. And in some buildings it might, if they haven't been well built to all the relevant standards. But if it's done properly and people ventilate and have an airtight building, then it should all work. One of the challenges that we've got, and I'm afraid the Grenfell Tower investigations have revealed this, we're not always very good at viewing our buildings as a complete system. So we look at it as something to ventilate, or we look at it as something to make energy efficient, and we don't connect the two things as much as we should. And if we do make that connection, we ought to be able to build low air permeability, energy efficient, ventilated buildings.
Is there any quick wins that can be done to help with especially older buildings? And also, how do we get a more joined up approach then to tackle those issues?
I think we do need a more joined up approach, and the people who specialise in retrofit need encouraging to take that whole systems approach. We really need the people who are funding retrofit to understand that they need to press people to do it properly. Perhaps the finance needs to be a little more conditional on having competent people doing things. There are standards. There's something called PAS 2035, which deals with retrofit of energy efficient retrofit of existing buildings. We've got the tools. We need to get more people trained up to use them.
So the challenge is more with the retrofit than with the new build, you would say?
Retrofit is more challenging because with new build you'll have a developer who may be churning out several hundred units of that design so they can spend a bit of time optimising it. With retrofit, virtually everyone's a prototype.
Yeah. It seems appropriate that as we're at Future Build, we talk about the Future Home Standard. The standard will see all new homes built by 2025 to produce 75 to 80% less carbon than currently being delivered. So there's a massive step forward in terms of the bigger goal of carbon net zero. But is the household sector ready to meet this, do you think?
I suspect not. I strongly suspect not, partly because exactly what they're going to have to achieve hasn't been identified yet. My understanding is that the government plans to consult next year on the Future Home Standard and the Future Building Standard for non-domestic, and so we'll get a reasonable sight of what they think we should be trying to do next year. And then organisations like CIBSE and our members and the house builders will all be looking at that and asking, do we think that's going to work? Do we think that's realistic? We might come at it from different perspectives. At that point, we'll begin to get a feel for what's involved, and not just what's involved technically to make it work, but have we got the people? Have we got the designs? Will we be able to get the equipment? It's going to be an evolving piece, at least for the next 3 years and probably a bit beyond.
And this is a huge challenge, isn't it? Because we're going to have to retrofit houses and build new houses to standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we can learn a lot from the last 2 years. It was the biggest change in civil liberties outside wartime in well over a century, if not ever in British life. All the government advisors said, we're not sure that the public will go along with this. They were stunned at the level of compliance they achieved. We need to learn from that, because we're not going to need anything quite that draconian, but people will have to sign up to changing their behaviour in major ways for good. If people move from having a gas-fuelled boiler to having a heat pump in their home, they will need to change the way they behave in their home, because you can't just go and press an override switch and get an instant boost with a heat pump. So you have to learn it's a different piece of technology. And there's a huge behavioural piece around all of this, persuading people that it's worth doing, persuading people that they can be comfortable with these new technologies, persuading people that the workforce that's going to come and install them has got a reasonable idea what it's doing, persuading them that when it does go wrong, they will get it fixed promptly, and it won't be like a certain well-known brand who's having problems with its boiler servicing contracts. We've got to take the public with us, and we've got to educate them, and it's a behaviour change programme that's not far off what we've seen over the last 2 years. It's a massive undertaking, and I do wonder how much people understand that.
Do you think the energy crisis in terms of escalating fuel costs might help accelerate an adoption of cleaner and cheaper, hopefully what would become cleaner or cheaper systems?
I'm in two minds on this. In theory, higher fuel prices should make people think, what can I do to be more energy efficient? And you'd like to think that owner-occupiers and those who are reasonably well off will react in that way. The challenge is that a third of our housing market is rented. The people who pay the bills don't control the costs. And there's very little they can do if they're tenants. The people who need to invest in energy efficiency don't pay the bills. So there's this massive disconnect for the private rented sector, and it disproportionately affects the poor, and that is a social issue. My other concern, or my concern is that, and we've begun to see people saying, well, look, we've got North Sea gas, we ought to be turning the taps on. We ought to be encouraging more exploration, because if we're using North Sea gas, it hasn't got to come from the east with all the problems that now brings. We'd be using gas anyway, so it doesn't have a carbon impact. And so why don't we do that? Well, I'm afraid what that does is it means it locks a whole load more investment into a higher carbon future. There's no guarantee that the gas that we would have taken will not end up somewhere else, so we've just increased the gas component of global supply. That's not what we want to do. And it doesn't help get the investment into the lower carbon stuff. So there are some real challenges about this. Higher energy prices might help, but they might cause some perverse outcomes. And again, I'm afraid the politicians have got to look beyond the next election in making some of these decisions.
I think that's probably a bigger challenge than maybe getting people to change their own thinking.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk about performance gap, the difference between as modelled and as built. Are we anywhere closer to actually closing that gap, that performance gap, do you think?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, we've known about the performance gap one way or another for 20 years. For probably 10 to 15 years of that, people who said there's a performance gap were viewed as a nuisance. And I think some of the work on the Zero Carbon Hub helped to flush out that actually there is a problem, that what we build doesn't deliver what it's meant to build. It doesn't do what it says on the brochure. So that was the energy performance gap. Tragically, we then had Grenfell, which then demonstrated that it wasn't just around energy where we weren't getting what we thought the regs said we should get. And then we've had COVID, which has shown that it's not just energy and fire performance, it's around ventilation. So I think we're now all much more aware that there's a serious mismatch between what is promised, what is supposed to be in the regs, and what we often get. And I think we're much better placed now to start tackling that. And there is a greater understanding that we've got to do more to improve performance and quality. We've got more tools. For example, the revisions to Approved Document L that came out just before Christmas. There is now an expectation that for non-domestic buildings, you don't just do the regulatory compliance calculation in the SBEM tool, but you've actually got to go away and use some form of model to calculate the likely energy use of a building based on who it's being built for and what the likely use is. And if you don't know who it's being built for because it's a spec building, then there are some defaults there. But that is getting people to estimate likely energy use much more thoroughly than we've ever done before. So I think we're making progress.
Okay, that's excellent. One final question. We're at Future Build, so we should think about the future. What do you see as the single biggest challenge the industry is facing with the future, and why?
I think the biggest single issue, it's back to culture and changing behaviour. I think it's around a changing culture in the industry and how the industry is going to respond to the building safety agenda and what the implications of that are for energy performance and for the way that we're going to build in the future. So to give you a very tangible example, there are going to be new rules about competence. And if you want to engage somebody to work on a building, to do work that is notifiable under building regs, you as a client will have a statutory duty to take every reasonable step to make sure that the person you're appointing to do that work is competent. They will have a statutory duty to make sure they understand what you want them to do and to confirm that they think they are competent to do it. Now, we don't have that now. Now, if it's your household extension, the health and safety executive are not likely to be around in a hurry wanting to check up on you. If it's a higher risk building, which means it's over 18 metres, it's 7 or more stories, it's multi-residential, or it's a care home or a hospital that meets those height criteria, the HSE are going to be round and they are going to want to see and they are going to want to know that you as the client are discharging your duties, and they're going to go and start talking to some of the people you've appointed to satisfy themselves that you've appointed people who know what they're doing. That's a massive change in culture, and they'll focus on the higher risk buildings, but they are taking over the whole regulatory regime, so they will be looking at other buildings. As soon as they have cause for concern about a project, they'll be entitled to turn up and say, right, who's the principal designer on this? What entitles you to be the principal designer? You show me as the regulator that you ought to be doing this job. You, client, show me what due diligence you went through before you appointed them. And who's your main contractor? Can we do the same exercise for them? It's a massive change. And I'm not convinced many people in the industry know this is coming.
I can see where all of these changes are starting to add a level of protection, as well as also looking at the environment in the future in terms of reducing that zero carbon. All of these elements seem to be pulling together, and it almost seems like there is some joined up thinking going within the industry.
My observation is that there is some joined up thinking, and there are certainly quite a few people involved in the policy development who are saying, hang on, what did Dame Judith say? Treat buildings as a system. It's a system that needs to stand up, it's got to be structurally sound. We don't want it to burn down, the fire safety's got to be there. If there is a fire, we need to get people out safely in a controlled way. We need to get the brigade in to fight the fire. That may have implications for the way that lifts are provided, and firefighting lifts and evacuation lifts. If we've got vulnerable people in there, wheelchair users, we need to get them out safely. But we also want it to be energy efficient. We also want, it's got to meet the acoustics, because buildings that are noisy are unhealthy buildings. That the mental health implications of not meeting the acoustic requirements are significant. So there's all these parts of the building regs, and we want them all met. We want the overheating bit met. We want the ventilation bit met. And that means people have got to take a systems approach. There's certainly more of it. We're not there yet, we've got a bit to do. But as you say, that's the future direction that we've got to chart out.
That seems quite positive, at least.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some grim things in the industry, but there are opportunities for those that are committed to doing it better to do that. The challenge is enabling the people who want to do the right things to do them in a sensible commercial model. And we've got to get away from the lowest cost, cheapest, race to the bottom mentality, which frankly has got us into a lot of the mess that we're in.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Thank you.
Good.
We hope you found this video from Fabric useful. For more, don't forget to subscribe, browse our playlists, and please like or share this video. Thanks for watching.